Let us pray. Our Father, keep us mindful of the special and unique opportunity we have to work for our constituents and our province. And in that work, give us strength and wisdom. Amen.
Introduction of visitors, presenting petitions, reading and receiving petitions, presenting reports by standing and special committees, notices of motions, introduction of bills.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce Bill 229, an act to amend the Labor Relations Act. Mr. Speaker, the bill would restore the legitimacy of so-called bridging clauses in existing collective agreements, clauses which both the courts and the Labor Relations Board have ruled to be void of effect once a collective agreement has expired. Mr. Speaker, further, this bill would provide that during a strike or lockout, no employer may alter terms and conditions of employment or hire employees on different terms and conditions of employment without first reaching agreement with the striking or locked out employee's bargaining agent as to the altered terms and/or conditions.
The honourable member for St. Albert has moved first reading of Bill number 229, an act to amend the Labour Relations Act. Does the Assembly agree to the motion for first reading? Opposed? Carried.
A bill being an act to amend the Labour Relations Act introduced by Honourable Member Mr. Strong is now read a first time.
Beg leave to introduce Bill 212, the Ambulance Service Act. Mr. Speaker, the purpose of this bill is to establish a uniform and high-standard ambulance service throughout Alberta. Mr. Speaker, I first presented this in the early 70s, and with any kind of luck, the government will take action one of these years.
The honourable member for Clover Bar has moved first reading of Bill 212, the Ambulance Service Act. Does the Assembly agree to the motion for first reading? Opposed, if any? Carried.
A bill being Ambulance Service Act introduced by Honourable Member Dr. Buck is now read a first time.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce Bill 216. The principle of this bill is to amend Section 119 of the Municipal Government Act regarding plebiscites. No plebiscite pursuant to this section would be valid unless the number of votes cast in the plebiscite were greater than 66 2/3% of the total votes cast in the preceding election.
The honourable member for Drumheller has moved first reading of Bill 216, an act to amend the Municipal Government Act. All those in favour of the introduction of first reading, please say aye. Those opposed? Carried.
A bill being an act to amend the Municipal Government Act introduced by Honourable Member Mr. Schumacher is now read a first time.
Speaker, I wish to introduce a bill being the Criminal Compensation Intercept Act. This bill, Mr. Speaker, allows the government to intercept various grants and subsidies that may be sent to someone who has created a criminal act, and that the monies can be given to the victim of that respective crime.
The honourable member for Little Bow has moved first reading of Bill 232, the Criminal Compensation Intercept Act. Does the Assembly agree to the motion for first reading? Opposed? So ordered.
A bill being Criminal Compensation Intercept Act, introduced by Honourable Member Mr. Speaker, is now read a first time.
Beg leave to introduce Bill 217, an act to amend the Landlord-Tenant Act. It concerns the matter of security deposits, and the principle of the bill, Mr. Speaker, where a landlord fails to repay the security deposit, the tenant may take action against either the landlord, the owners, or any directors of the company that owns such a building.
The honourable member for Lethbridge West has moved first reading of Bill 217, an act to amend the Landlord and Tenant Act. Does the Assembly agree to the motion for first reading? Opposed? So ordered.
A bill being an act to amend the Landlord and Tenant Act, introduced by Honourable Member Mr. Gogo, is now read a first time.
Mr. Speaker, I request leave to introduce a bill being an act to amend the Guarantees Acknowledgement Act. Mr. Speaker, the amendment requires that before signing a personal guarantee for a bank loan, an unsophisticated investor must take it to an independent lawyer who will make sure they understand the guarantee, their obligation under it, and sign a certificate to that effect.
The honourable member for Calgary-McCall has moved first reading of Bill 213, an act to amend the Guarantees Acknowledgement Act. Does the Assembly agree to the motion for first reading? Opposed? Carried.
A bill being an act to amend the Guarantees Acknowledgement Act, introduced by Honourable Member Mr. Nelson, is now read a first time.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce Bill number 218, the Alberta Palliative Care Foundation Act. The purpose of this bill is to initiate a foundation that can solicit and receive by gifts, bequests, or transfer of property and advance public awareness and understanding of palliative care.
The honourable member for Calgary Foothills has moved first reading of Bill 218, Alberta Palliative Care Foundation Act. Does the Assembly agree to the motion for first reading? Opposed? Carried.
A bill being Alberta Palliative Care Foundation Act, introduced by Honourable Member Mrs. Coper, is now read a first time.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce Bill number 211, which pertains to the introduction of mandatory seatbelt legislation in this province.
The honourable member for Calgary Northwest has moved first reading of Bill 211, the Seatbelt Act. Does the Assembly agree to the motion for first reading? Opposed? So ordered.
A bill being Seatbelt Act, introduced by Honourable Member Dr. Casson, is now read a first time.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce Bill number 221, the Motor Dealers Act. The purpose of this act is to put the regulations dealing with motor vehicles under one act, and it is modeled under bills from other provinces. Also, Mr. Speaker, many of the things suggested in this act are done by motor vehicle dealers as good business practices, but some need reinforcing.
The honourable member for Cypress Redcliffe has moved first reading of Bill 221, Motor Dealer Act. Does the Assembly agree to the motion for first reading? Opposed? Carried.
A bill being Motor Dealer Act, introduced by Honourable Member Mr. Highland, is now read a first time.
Mr. Speaker, I request leave to introduce two bills. The first being the Bill 204, the Plain English Law Act. Mr. Speaker, this bill would put in place a review procedure designed to ensure provincial legislation is in direct, plain, and understandable English.
I'm sure all members will be very attentive to the bill. The honourable member for Ponoka-Rimby has moved first reading of Bill 204, the Plain English Law Act. Does the Assembly agree to the motion for first reading? Opposed, if any? Carried.
A bill being Plain English Law Act introduced by Honourable Member Mr. Johnson is now read a first time.
Mr. Speaker, I request leave to introduce a bill, Bill 235, being an act to amend the Landlord and Tenant Act. Mr. Speaker, this bill would put in place or would change the act in order that a business being in a landlord-tenant relationship would be allowed to be open 1 day per week. Closed 1 day per week.
The honourable member for Ponoka-Rimby has further moved first reading of Bill number 235, an act to amend the Landlord and Tenant Act. Does the Assembly agree to the motion for first reading? Opposed? So ordered.
A bill being an act to amend the Landlord and Tenant Act introduced by Honourable Member Mr. Johnson is now read a first time.
Leave to introduce Bill number 6, the Appropriation Act 1986. This bill being a money bill, Her Honor, the Honourable Lieutenant Governor, having been informed of the contents of this bill, recommends the same to the Assembly. Mr. Speaker, this bill for just over $5.7 billion includes the amount of $4 billion, which, by way of special warrant, allowed the government to operate until full Appropriation Act has been dealt with. And the Act itself, of course, will allow the operation of the government until estimates are fully considered by this Assembly.
The Honourable Provincial Treasurer has moved first reading of the Appropriation Interim Supply Act 1986. Does the Assembly agree to the motion for first reading? Opposed? So ordered.
A bill being Appropriation Interim Supply Act 1986, introduced by the Honourable Mr. Johnston, is now read a first time. Tabling returns and reports.
Mr. Speaker, I wish to table response to question 133.
Mr. Speaker, I wish to file with the Assembly copies of the 4 communiques issued by the Western Premiers Conference 1986 held in Swan River, Manitoba, and as well a document entitled Beyond Alberta's Borders, the Trade Challenge. Copies, I think, have been already made available to all members of the Assembly.
Introduction of special guests.
Mr. Speaker, it is a pleasure to introduce to you and through you to the members of this Assembly 42 students of grade 6 nature from the Viking School in my constituency of Vermilion Viking. I can say today, because it is the first time that I've ever introduced visitors to this Assembly, that this is the best looking group of visitors that I have ever introduced to this Assembly. They are accompanied by their teachers, Dan Kardish and Barb Fandrick, and accompanied by parents Doris Marco, Phyllis Leftrud, Barb Morkan, and their bus drivers Sandra Zadoroniak and Terry Sorensen. They are seated in the members' galleries, and I would like them to stand now and receive the warm welcome of this Assembly.
Mr. Speaker, I take great pleasure in introducing 35 grade 5 and 6 students from Grandview Heights School in Edmonton Park, Allen. I would just say to them that being school children, they would know one of the things that we know here, and that is that you can be very busy even while seated in class or in the assembly, because I don't know when I've heard more bills introduced than today. The students have had a tour, and they are accompanied by Louise DeBrun, the teacher, and by parents Mrs. Pearson, Mrs. Krejci, Mrs. Heinmarsh. I would ask them to rise and receive the welcome of the members.
Mr. Speaker, it is my pleasure to introduce to you and through you to this Assembly a group of 50 delightful students from the Glengarry Elementary School, one of whom mistakenly gave me an honor by asking me if I was in fact the Premier of the province, to which I was forced to answer no. I would also like to welcome June McIver and Joan Shapka, their teachers, and I would like them to rise and accept the very warm welcome of the members of the Assembly.
Ministerial statements.
Mr. Speaker, Albertans have recently been saddened by the tragic loss of our fellow citizens in air accidents in the Kananaskis region of Alberta. The sympathy of the government is extended to the families and friends of the victims. The government also recognizes the efforts of all those persons who have been involved in the search and rescue attempts, and our sincere thanks is expressed to them. It is our understanding that as of last evening, the air search was discontinued, and as of this evening, the ground search will be terminated. Notwithstanding these search efforts, there still remains 2 persons unaccounted for. We believe that further ground search efforts are warranted for a period of time. Accordingly, I have asked the Minister responsible for Alberta Public Safety Services to make arrangements for the ground search to continue. And I've asked him today to give further details of those arrangements.
Mr. Speaker, I wish to inform the House that the Government of Alberta has made a further request to the Department of National Defence to continue an intensive ground search for an aircraft missing west of Calgary since June 6, 1986. On June 12, 1986, I requested that a ground search party of approximately 100 persons be made available for 72 hours to assist the search and rescue operation for the missing light aircraft, with 2 persons aboard in the Kananaskis area of Alberta. Midday today, a further request was made, and I'm pleased to advise that the Federal Minister of National Defence, Mr. Andre, has agreed to assist. The air search and rescue efforts of the Department of National Defence and the Civil Air Rescue Emergency Service have covered every primary search area several times without sighting the aircraft. These resources will remain on call to the ground search forces should they be requested or required. The ground search forces are doing a detailed search of the entire area where the aircraft is believed to have gone missing. Kananaskis country personnel and approximately 120 Department of National Defence personnel from the Princess Patricia's Canadian Light Infantry at Calgary have been involved in the search. The request made today by the Alberta government to the Department of National Defence is to extend the original request made on June 12 for ground search personnel until the primary search area has been thoroughly covered and every reasonable effort has been made to locate the missing aircraft and its crew. An additional 30 people from the Alberta Forestry, Lands and Wildlife Department will augment the search effort, and volunteer groups are being organized to assist if required under the overall direction of the ground search coordinator, Mr. Lloyd Gallagher, Public Safety Coordinator, Kananaskis Country.
Mr. Speaker, to reply to the ministerial announcements by the Premier and the Minister, I would like to compliment them both on the step that they've taken today, because I'm sure that they're aware that we would have been approached as the official opposition to perhaps raise this matter by representatives of the family. I think we can all appreciate the anxiety experienced by the family, and I imagine in a situation like this where you just don't know, it's unbearable. And I appreciate now that the ground search is going to go on, as I understand it, in the primary search areas until every reasonable effort has been made. And again, I compliment the government. I think it is the right decision under the circumstances. I would just say, Mr. Speaker, in conclusion, that in view of the fact that there does not seem to be, and it probably puts the government in some dismay, not knowing what to do, any clear-cut policy of the provincial role in disasters like this, perhaps the minister could take under advisement that an independent review of the process might be in order. But I lay that as an example of something that perhaps could be done. But again, in conclusion, I appreciate the good work done by both gentlemen in this case.
Oral question period.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, enough compliments for the day. I'd like to turn my attention to the provincial treasurer in regard to the budget, Mr. Speaker. In both the budget speech delivered by Mr. Hyman in April and in last night's address, the treasurer, the government has claimed that it is not possible to accurately estimate energy revenues for next year. I think the term is the oil price is termed a moving target. Nonetheless, Mr. Speaker, the government is sticking to an estimate of 1/3 reduction in non-renewable resource revenue. The question to the minister, could the minister then indicate then how this estimate came about? Did the minister flip a coin and decide that this was a good estimate and we'd throw it out to the Assembly?
Mr. Speaker, of course the government, in preparing or recommending a budget to the Assembly, gives ample and care consideration to the numbers and the estimates which are therein reflected. On the revenue side, of course, there were some difficulties in arriving at an estimate as to what the revenue would be, given the current uncertainty in oil pricing. In particular, in the April the 10th budget, the trend was down, as you are probably well aware, and in terms of this budget, there was a trend upwards in terms of world oil pricing. In the case of the revenue assumptions, Mr. Speaker, you should note that the budget now, towards the middle of June, is approximately 2 months into its fiscal period. What this budget does reflect, Mr. Speaker, is the confidence in the fact that prices will firm towards the end of 1986 and early 1987, that the royalty assessments and cash flow will in fact take place as demand starts to pick up towards the winter months. Right now, all world consuming countries have low inventories of energy and will building up reserves through the latter part of 1986. And of course, the winter months themselves will engender its own demand as the demand for energy starts to prompt more usage of liquid hydrocarbons, and certainly those from Canada who will be exporting into the United States will strengthen and firm both the price and the market opportunities.
Supplementary question, Mr. Speaker. In terms of the Treasurer's estimates, seems somewhat contradictory to other forecasters. And I noticed that the C.D. Howe Institute projected several years of depressed commodity prices. My question to the minister, flowing along from his logic, I understand he says that there will not be a deficit, should be basically paid off by 1990. In view of most forecasters, how would the minister come to that solution or that conclusion that there will be no deficit by 1990?
Mr. Speaker, what I indicated in terms of the deficit was that it's my feeling and view that increased royalty revenue to the province of Alberta will more than offset this year's deficit by 1990. That's a clear assessment. Obviously, we're forecasting to some extent, but I think that's a reasonable position to take in light of the experience which this government has seen in terms of its 1982 fiscal plan, where in fact a $2 billion deficit was suggested, and that has now been fully recovered. The current position of the government at April the 1st, 1986 is that we have a $900 million surplus, even though over the past 3 years we have in fact budgeted for deficits. It shows the cyclical nature of the cash flow, and I have every confidence in the fact that our revenue projections through to this period will be confirmed as we move closer to March 31st, 1987.
If I may say so, Mr. Speaker, because the minister says so and the backbenchers pound their desks, did not make it necessarily come about. My question simply to the minister, in view of the fact that most forecasters are predicting low commodity prices, what other information does the government have that would lead them to go to forecasters like the C.D. Howe Institute, for example?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Leader of the Opposition has not given us much more to judge from, giving only his own view in the C.D. Howe estimates. And I don't know if that adds much more to the argument than, in fact, he has presented, except to say that the frailty in the question of pricing and judgment of pricing has gone in many directions, from the high prices through the period of 1979 through to the scenarios that we now see. It is a safe assessment, given the action of the commodity market, given our assessment of demand, and given our assessment of supply, both in terms of OPEC and non-OPEC producers, that demand will increase through the end of 1986 for the reasons that I have suggested, and that can only stimulate price increases, which we are confident will take place and which we are confident will reinforce our budget estimates.
Well, supplementary question, I would remind the minister that the figures that he projected in the budget have actually gone down in the last few months, and he's well aware of that. But in view of that, so we can make an intelligent, have an intelligent budget debate, we have not, again, had the various elements of the resource revenue category brought in the budget. Would the minister be prepared to give his figures in, how he came to the suggestion that we have in this legislature about this budget? Would he be prepared to table the departmental projections upon which the revenue estimates are based? Would he do that in this legislature so we can have an intelligent debate about this particular problem?
Speaker, first of all, the Honourable Leader makes a statement with respect to the new stated revenue forecast. Obviously, the reduction in revenues which are now reflected in this statement reveal the new incentives which this government has brought forward to stimulate activity in the oil and gas sector. Never before has the government responded to assist the sector, and we will continue with that commitment to ease it through this period. With that kind of position, with that kind of commitment, we are sure that new investment will flow, that in fact that will match the demand situation which we see. Secondly, with respect to the detailed analysis, Mr. Speaker, I can simply say that we are sticking with our position. It will be a one-third assessment. It is as good a guess as any with respect to a number of variables which are factored into the price prediction, and that is what we'll have to deal with in terms of the debate in this House.
Member Westlock Sturgeon.
Mr. Speaker, to the minister, while complimenting his wild, if unreasonable optimism, I wonder if he could tell us, Mr. Speaker, how much the price of a barrel of oil in Alberta will have to rise to equal the $2.5 billion that he has to recover in a deficit. How much will Alberta oil have to rise to equal that amount or generate that $2.5 billion that he says we are short in the deficit?
Well, of course, Mr. Speaker, the honourable member is trying to get me into another guessing game on a different plane. It should be noted that part of the royalty, part of the revenue flow to the province of Alberta is based on a number of assumptions, not just the price assumption. And the other assumptions, of course, must include the volumes. And I would hope that he speaks for the industry when, as we are saying, we're encouraging expanded volumes of natural gas sales, for example, in the United States, always an objective of this government, and we think that should happen and will happen over the decade. We're looking at as well in terms of other demand for the synthetic production, and this government has made a clear commitment to increase the expansion of synthetic production in this province with the two initiatives in here for Syncrude and for Suncor, and we'll continue with that commitment, and that will allow us to have energy self-sufficiency, which will meet the increased demand. And finally, Mr. Speaker, the royalty side is always subject to change. We know that. As the prices increase, obviously royalties increase. Though, Mr. Speaker, are three of the elements which the member asked for. I'm attempting to respond to his question. He may not agree with the analysis, but in fact, that is as close to the presentation as you're going to get.
Member for Little Bow.
Speaker, supplementary question to the provincial treasurer. How does the provincial treasurer rationalize the fact of increased production and also stability of revenue from the oil and gas industry when projections this summer in the industry in Calgary of unemployment range up to 20%?
Yes.
Mr. Speaker, of course, the budget document also indicates the uncertain period which we're now in, moving through to the summer. Every statement that we have made deals with the balance of the year starting in the fall of 1986 to the early months of 1987. As we've indicated, if there's any indication of firming of the price, which we think will take place towards the end of 1986, there will be a quick response by that industry. It's ready to invest. It knows it has an opportunity. And as the budget address says, the finding costs and opportunities in Alberta are greater than anywhere else in North America.
For those of you who haven't been in the legislature, it sounds like we have a microphone. I've heard it all before, Mr. Speaker. Next question to the Minister of Labour, if I may, Mr. Speaker. And it concerns the frankly appalling news that Gainers Incorporated is cancelling its pension plan. My question is to the Minister. Has the Minister asked his officials for any information on whether or not this would be possible, given legislation that protected bridging clauses and stopped the 24-hour lockout game?
Mr. Speaker, this matter first came to my attention at about 1:30, I think, on Friday afternoon, and I very promptly transmitted the information to the Disputes Inquiry Board, to Mr. Dubinsky, as I felt that since benefits were one of the items under dispute, that he should have the information, and he got it either on Friday or first thing on Monday morning.
Well, very excellent work. Let the disparity accused. My question simply is this. Has the minister reviewed the labor laws to see if the bridging concept, if that was brought back, that it would stop this sort of move by gainers?
Mr. Speaker, the matter of this is that any private pension can be closed down at a given time. There are regulations and there are laws to cover that process. Those regulations and those laws will be followed in this instance.
So, Mr. Speaker, supplementary question. Obviously, the minister hasn't looked into it. But could he indicate, saying he talked about the disputes inquiry, that he let the mediator know? Could the minister indicate then to this assembly if this latest unjust news is in any way harming the disputes inquiry process, as the UFCW has indicated?
I'm unaware of that fact. I haven't had any communication from Mr. Dubinsky along those lines.
Supplementary question, Mr. Speaker. If it is proven that the bridging, if it was proven to the minister's satisfaction that the bridging was causing the problem of this pension, could we get a commitment from this government then to move in this session and bring about a change in the bridging part of it and follow the private member's bill that was just advanced today?
Mr. Speaker, my understanding is that the termination is dated for May the 31st of this year, which was prior to the strike starting or the lockout.
Supplementary, no. Question given by the Leader of the Liberal Party.
Question, Mr. Speaker, is to the Honourable Premier. As he's aware, we have subsidized Ontario and Quebec when oil prices were high to the tune of $40 or $50 billion, in excess of $50 billion exactly. And in light of the recent decline of oil prices, in spite of the rather happy dreams of our treasurer across there, will the Premier ask the Prime Minister to renegotiate the terms for the Western Accord, which would see Eastern Canada paying back just a little bit of what they owe us?
Mr. Speaker, I think it is appropriate for the Government of Alberta to raise with the federal government and all Eastern Canadians who Alberta has helped so much during the high price of energy to participate in programs that would assist Alberta and other Western provinces' energy sector, and we will be doing that.
Mr. Speaker, when will the Premier be meeting with the Prime Minister to formulate a new energy accord?
Mr. Speaker, the responsibility to start these negotiations is with the Minister of Energy, who has already mentioned a meeting that he will be having with the Federal Minister of Energy, and then we will take any additional meetings as required.
Supplementary, Mr. Speaker. Could the Premier tell us, or maybe could he assure the legislature, that this hemorrhage is not going to continue, and that he's speaking, or will he be taking a position against the deregulation of gas prices? Will he be asking his federal cousins to delay the deregulation of gas prices?
Mr. Speaker, there's some debate in the industry and in government circles as to whether or not it's beneficial to move in the area of full deregulation of natural gas. And as the members know, that we have gone through a year period while industry prepares for the deregulation. Many people in industry feel we should continue in the course of deregulation. The Honourable Leader of the Liberal Party has some views on this. I wish he would express them, and we would certainly take them into account.
Speaker, to the Minister of Energy on a related matter. Given that Ontario and Quebec refineries are switching to cheaper imported crude, will the Minister inform the Assembly what steps he is taking to ensure that this province's oil has guaranteed access to Canadian markets?
Well, Mr. Speaker, as a result of the energy accord that we had with the federal government, and I might add, Mr. Speaker, that as a result of that energy accord and the natural gas agreement, we had in this province in 1985 one of the best years the industry has seen. And that change has certainly come about because of the fall in the international prices of oil, which is essentially beyond our control. But in terms of the question the honourable member asked, as a result of that energy accord and as a result of talking to industry and their desires to see deregulation take place, it was naturally expected that there would be some increase in imports, but at the same time there's been an increase in exports. And at the present time, that has been the case.
My question is to the Provincial Treasurer, and it's with regards to two comments the Provincial Treasurer has made in terms of the Farm Credit Stability Program. In Hansard of June 13th, the Minister has indicated, yes, again, Mr. Speaker, I think our position is clear on that. This program is not an interest subsidy program as such, and in the budget last night, the Minister has indicated on page 6 of the budget address, the statutory funding requirement for the interest rate relief is estimated at $25 million in 1986 and 87. Could the Minister indicate why the contradiction? Is it an interest subsidy program or is it not?
Mr. Speaker, there is no contradiction. It is not an interest rate subsidy program. I'm sure we'll have an opportunity when the estimates of Treasury come forward to debate that further, except the plan of the government now is to introduce a long-term credit stability program at a fixed rate of interest, which cannot be described as being an interest rate subsidy program.
Mr. Speaker, supplementary to the Minister, could the Minister indicate at what time the program will be available? The Minister has indicated possibly after the long week in first week of July, the holiday weekend. Will applications be available at that time, or will the announcement of details be available to the general public at that time?
Mr. Speaker, we're rushing with all our resources and abilities, human resources, to meet the deadline, which I think the Premier and the Minister of Agriculture have specified. It's of that order. Obviously, if you want to tie us down to a date, it's going to be difficult to give you a specific date because you remind us how far we failed. But I'm simply telling you, as an honest commitment as possible, we're doing our utmost to get the plan in place for the early part of the summer of this year.
Mr. Speaker, supplementary question to the Honourable Provincial Treasurer. In terms of preference of application, will there be any preference in terms of who is served by those applications. Persons in financial difficulty, say first of all. Secondly, existing loans that farmers have in place. And thirdly, possibly new loans. Will there be a preference system established when the loan applications become available, or do the farmers line up on that day and 30 deep apply as quickly as they can?
Mr. Speaker, we're hopeful that with the number of financial institutions which are in place in this province, including Treasury branches and credit unions, that we should be able to meet the immediate demand for loan assistance. Yet, Mr. Speaker, recognizing the member's interest and concern about the farm community that he represents, perhaps he could recommend to me a priority list which we could consider as information.
Mr. Supplementary to the provincial treasurer, and it's with regards to the program for small business across the province of Alberta. Will that program take on the same format as the program of the Alberta Farm Credit Stability Program?
Mr. Speaker, as the member, I'm sure, is aware, when we announced before the election the broad details of these programs, we felt that in the case of the Farm Stability Program, that a longer term, 20 years in particular, was envisioned in this program to assist farmers to move out of the current debt problem they're facing. But with respect to the Small Business Program, we felt it should be of a shorter term. But generally, outside of the term, Mr. Speaker, the conditions of the two programs will be very much the same.
Supplementary, member for Westlock Sturgeon.
Mr. Speaker, to the Treasurer, with respect to the supplementary to the respect to the farm loans, I appreciate his system of priorities. It conjured up in my mind visions of another Oklahoma land rush, but I wanted to get it through to the Premier or to the Treasurer. With his estimate in the budget of $25 or so million in cost, are you talking about a guarantee of interest to the farmers? In other words, a interest shielding scheme whereby the banks or some other institution will lend the money and the government just guarantees the interest rate will not go above that? Or are you actually talking about lending money from the Heritage Trust Fund?
Mr. Speaker, I must first of all confess that not all of the financial dealings with the institutions are in place, and I'm sure the member from Westlock Sturgeon can understand that I'm to some extent providing the best explanation as we can at this point. But because it is not an interest rate subsidy program, and because we want to establish fixed-term loans for the farm community, we intend to use the financial institutions to deliver those programs at a fixed rate of interest. Obviously, institutions do not do this for no fee, nor would anyone in the private sector do it for no fee when there are obviously costs involved. What we will do is use the financial strength of this province from a variety of sources, including the Heritage Savings Trust Fund, as referenced by the member, to provide the funding to the financial institutions at some rate which will allow them to make a decent rate of return or a spread on that money. As to the charge and as to the charges which will be incorporated in that negotiation, of course, those are not totally in place at this point, and I cannot go further than to simply sketch for the member that broad arrangement. But clearly, Mr. Speaker, it's a fixed-rate interest program. Subsidies to the farmers are not directly in place, and we hope that the take-up will be significant to assist this particular sector of the farming community. And we know that, among other provinces in Canada, this is a unique and novel approach to dealing with this particular problem.
Supplementary.
Speaker, as a member from a rural constituency, I'd like to assure the Minister that there's considerable concern in the community about the rate chosen for this program, that the 9% rate is too high and won't have the desired effect. What we'd like to know is there a mechanism in place to allow for a lowering of the rates when you see that it's not having the desired effect in the farming community?
Good question, if they'd listen.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I appreciate the position of the member. Obviously, the rate is of concern to all of us, but I think in terms of contemporary financial borrowing plans that the 9% is substantially below the existing long-term rate. And if the member has other information he can provide to me, I'd certainly appreciate it. But right now, I think the 9% is the best long-term rate in Canada.
Member for Ponoka-Rimby, followed by the member for Edmonton-Goldbar.
Mr. Speaker, I wish to propose a question to the Minister of Manpower. Mr. Speaker, with the secondary schools of the province winding down for the school year and the consequent influx of students onto the job market, I wonder if the Minister could advise the House as to what programs are or will be in place to meet this demand for jobs from high school students.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Department of Manpower has two excellent summer programs relating to the surge of temporary employment from the school's students. The first one is Hire a Student, which I think is probably the most famous hiring program in this province. We have 53 offices across the province. It's a federal Alberta Chamber and Alberta Manpower joint initiative, and it's been very successful over the years. The second is the Summer Temporary Employment Program. Provides career work-related experience for post-secondary students. We have offices throughout the province, and certainly if there are students that you are aware of, the honourable member is aware of, that are looking for summer employment, I would certainly feel comfortable in referring to any one of these two programs.
Supplementary question, Mr. Speaker. Given that, Mr. Speaker, there certainly are some students that are not yet employed for the summer, I wonder if the Minister could advise the House as to whether he has any estimate of the effectiveness of the programs that he's mentioned.
Certainly, Mr. Speaker. The Hire a Student program last year reached out and assisted some 44,000 students in this province, and the STEP program assisted some 11,500 students. And I might say that if we total all of the manpower programs related to employment, we assist individuals in one way or another to a total of 460,000 people, and I think that's a very, very admirable job done by the Department of Manpower and this government.
Supplementary, member for Edmonton-Belmont.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm wondering if the Minister can advise the House if he's intending on extending the application program for summer temporary employment. I understand that program, the application time expired a number of weeks ago.
The deadline was the 1st of April, Mr. Speaker, and that deadline is the same year to year, and we have at this time no plans to extend that deadline.
Member for Edmonton Gold Bar, followed by the member for Edmonton Kingsway.
Mr. Speaker, to the provincial treasurer, relative to the $750 million loan program for small business, when can we anticipate this program will be implemented, Mr. Treasurer?
Mr. Speaker, our priority right now is to deal with the farming community, and we're attempting to get that program in place given the urgency expressed by some members. But we expect that through the summer as well, shortly after the introduction and completion of the Farm Credit Stability Program, that in fact the small business program will be ready to go. Obviously, the details and some of the approaches will be applied to that program, and we expect it to move fairly rapidly.
Supplementary, Mr. Speaker. Will the administration of this program be undertaken by a government department or by private agents? The $15 million, I take it, is the same in this program as in the farm shielding.
To both questions, Mr. Speaker, we will use the existing financial infrastructure or the financial institutions within this province to deliver the program, because it obviously allows the institutions to deal with their clients, and we simply assist that particular strength in the Alberta economy, the private sector, wherever possible, to expand their credit horizons. Secondly, with respect to the costs, you're absolutely right. The same procedures are in place or contemplated, and that's why this appropriation is in my budget.
Mr. Speaker, to the Treasurer, would you outline for the Assembly the eligibility criteria for receiving assistance under the program?
Mr. Speaker, I probably would be glad to do it at some point, but first of all, the test of eligibility and the criteria are now directly the responsibility of the Minister of Economic Development. I don't want to trap myself, because I understand, Premier, that I'm also the acting Minister of Economic Development, but I can safely say, Mr. Speaker, that the intention of the program, first of all, is to stabilize the long-term funding requirements of the private sector, the small business in particular, The small business test will apply in terms of assets and income. The Alberta presence will apply in terms of ensuring that it's an Alberta corporation, and the Alberta ownership will apply to ensure that Alberta investors are taken advantage of. We know that the private sector generates 60,000 some jobs in each year, and we're trying to bring a program in behind it to ensure that job opportunities are created in this province.
Mr. Speaker, a final supplementary to the Treasurer. Will, for instance, as in the Alberta Stock Savings Plan, an eligibility requirement of $250,000 in assets is one of the requirements. Does the government intend to use the same criteria for eligibility to participate in the small business loan program?
Of course, Mr. Speaker, you can appreciate that the scale of operations in the case of small businesses must be reduced dramatically, and we will err in favor, if you excuse the term, a liberal assessment of small business. But we will do our best to ensure that the widest possible number of small businesses are eligible for this program. The asset test will be a minimum, simply to preclude the larger corporations from benefiting from this program.
Excuse us, please. The member for Clover Bar, please.
Speaker, the Honourable Minister, in this, what does this first come, first serve mean to the government? Does that mean as a lineup, or does it mean on the application or blue and orange cards? What does the first come, first serve thing mean?
First of all, Mr. Speaker, if the member is adding to the comments of his colleague with respect to the priority list, I've attempted to show that we'll deal with all loans as quickly as possible, and that's the intention of the program. And obviously, we do not, at this point to a first-come, first-served list. I would expect that those loans where the farmer or the small businessman has some sort of a crisis before him would have obviously become the priority. And that's only a reasonable expectation. That is also the discussions that we've had at the financial institutions. I should say, Mr. Speaker, while I have an opportunity, I do not want to mislead the lady with respect to my last answer. I want to be absolutely clear that we will have as easy an approach to asset tests as possible. There will not be the $250,000 test that she referred to.
Supplementary, the member for Calgary Mountain View.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to ask the Minister as a supplementary who determines whether an individual business qualifies or does not qualify. That is, how will this program be different from getting a loan, for a small business, getting a loan from their usual bank manager or their loans officer? How will it be different from that?
Well, Mr. Speaker, there are a variety of ways in which I could differentiate. I think it is safe to say, however, that in this program the government anticipates providing a guarantee where the risk is greater. And I'm sure that this risk in itself, or this guarantee in itself, will ensure that riskier loans, obviously, are given to the private sector. That's the general intention. Again, Mr. Speaker, I hesitate to be too specific because not all of these details have been put in place with respect to the financial institutions.
Member for Edmonton Kingsway, followed by the member for Edmonton Centre.
Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Provincial Treasurer. Has the Treasurer asked his officials for a report on how in the world it is possible for a provisional certificate of eligibility, that a provisional certificate of eligibility was issued by his department for a company, Assessments International Limited, which intends to use the Alberta Stock Savings Plan to build a water slide in Redondo Beach, California?
Mr. Speaker, of course I've asked and there's been no certificate issued.
There is. Supplementary, Mr. Speaker. Will the Treasurer not admit that quite a number of these provisional certificates of eligibility have been issued? There are a number of press reports to that effect.
Reference to the press, I'm sorry, is out of order, but perhaps the minister would like to respond to the first question. No, he doesn't.
Mr. Speaker, I perhaps should take just a few seconds since the question has been raised now. I ask your advice, however, sir, that we are dealing not with legislation, but with essentially policy, which the government has implemented to some extent. On the assumption that I can give a brief explanation, perhaps, Mr. Speaker, I should do that. First, well, let me.
Both sides of the House, please continue.
I always like that. Mr. Speaker, let me begin by saying that the intention of this plan, the Alberta Stock Savings Plan, was introduced and outlined by legislation brought forward by my previous colleague, Mr. Lou Hyman, as then Provincial Treasurer. And in that legislation, we put out a policy statement which we believe will encourage private sector investment in Alberta companies. Obviously, the intention was to ensure that Alberta private investors would be able to use the tax system, which is a general application to all investors in Alberta, to muster the aggregate potential in Alberta to invest back in the private sector and obviously to generate jobs and to generate economic activity. That still is the intention and the initiative which this government will follow. Secondly, Mr. Premier, it has often been discussed in this country, this confederation of provinces, an issue of economic union. And we know full well that it is in fact impossible to prevent money from flowing outside of our provinces, even though the plans or the incentives or the benefits have been driven by a particular province. And we in Alberta have worked on that premise for some time, Mr. Speaker, since we have withdrawn a lot of money from other parts of Canada to support mega projects in this province. I witness some of the substantial investments in oil and gas development, in synthetic oil and crude, in the petrochemical industry in particular. So we know when we work on the principle that in a confederation you must allow for the free flow of resources within the country. Thirdly, Mr. Premier, or Mr. Speaker, let me indicate to you that we intend to maintain the Alberta President's priority. There's no way that we will back away from the test to ensure, wherever possible, that the maximum economic benefits flow to this province.
Excuse me. Thank you. Sorry, would you please resume your place as well? At some stage of this last number of minutes, I did hear the word brief. My definition of brief is being somewhat sorely tested. And with respect to the fact that the Chair has some discomfort with the question at the moment, I believe that I'm going to have us move on and recognize the next member into question period, because we have at least 9 other members who are anxious to get into this discussion. I'm sorry if the Chair is going to recognize. I'm sorry. Does the member have a point of order?
Well, it does seem to me that when the government is proceeding with a plan that is getting reaction, that's not a hypothetical question, and that they deserve to be questioned on that. And so,
if you have a very brief supplementary question, which is without rhetoric, without comment, one brief supplementary question, no, I'm sorry, you're not in a bargaining position. One brief.
well, will this government assure us then that the majority of the jobs created by the investments they make through this plan accrue to Alberta?
Mr. Speaker, I believe I've already given that assurance. That is one of the principles which we will stick to. We will attempt to define the Alberta presidents wherever possible, ensure and maximize that the investment flows come to our province first of all.
The member for Edmonton Centre, followed by the member for Calgary-Buffalo.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Honourable the Minister for Hospitals and Medical Care. As we were reminded in the House yesterday, this is Senior Citizens Week in Alberta. And as we were told in the government's speech from the throne, that the government's commitment to the best health care system anywhere in the world. But as the Minister is no doubt aware, we are facing a crisis in this province of health care for the elderly. My question for the Minister is, what is he doing about the fact that now 5 out of the 9 positions for geriatricians at the Youville Memorial Hospital are now vacant, and other growing threats to the facility's survival as an active treatment geriatric hospital?
Mr. Speaker, most honourable members would be aware that the Youville Memorial Hospital is a part of the Edmonton General Hospital. It is a very unique institution in terms of its role in health care for senior citizens. As such, there have been a number of difficulties over the course of the last 3 years in bringing that institution to its full capabilities. The role of the Youville Hospital has not been clearly defined and agreed to by the Department of Hospitals and Medical Care, the University of Alberta Medical Department, and the Board of the General Hospital. In addition to that, there is some dispute within the hospital as to who actually runs or controls or operates the Youville Memorial Hospital, whether it be the board of the hospital or the medical staff. Those differences of opinion have led to some uncertainty by certain medical staff as to what their position is and whether they want to continue providing their services to our senior citizens through that facility. The matter, Mr. Speaker, rests almost entirely with the Board of Directors of the Edmonton General Hospital, who have been meeting and will continue meeting, as I understand it, to discuss the problem associated with the medical staff and the fact that some have left and others may be preparing to leave. I can, however, assure the honourable member that as far as I'm concerned, the Department of Hospitals and Medical Care in my office, working with the board, will do everything we can to ensure that that facility is utilized to its fullest extent. And in that regard, we have 3 world-renowned specialists in medical care for elderly people, which will be visiting with us in July of this year to do a full assessment of the medical programs at the Youville Centre and making recommendations to both the board and my department and the medical staff. That fact is well known by all those involved.
Supplementary question, Mr. Speaker. I'm glad for the Minister's awareness of the key issue. Has he given consideration to having the 210 beds at the Youville has been set aside for geriatric medicine? Has he considered giving the administration of those beds over either to an independent board or to Hospitals District 24 for their careful administration?
Mr. Speaker, as a matter of fact, no consideration whatever has been given to that because I have full confidence in the ability of the existing board of the Edmonton General Hospital to manage and operate properly the Youville wing of the Edmonton General Hospital.
Supplementary question, Mr. Speaker. That's like saying we should have heart specialists run a cancer hospital. Mr. Speaker, has the Minister for Hospitals and Medical Care ever spoken to the geriatricians at the Youville to know what their concerns and why the reasons for their massive resignations?
Mr. Speaker, I have spoken with the members of the administration of the hospital and also with the members of the board of directors of the hospital. And my contact with the hospital in terms of its operation will continue to be with those who are responsible for the hospital's operation, and that is the board of directors.
Supplementary question then, Mr. Speaker. Maybe we can ask the ex-hospitals minister if he knows about some of this. On the same topic, Mr. Speaker.
Yeah, I'm sorry you cannot direct a question to the previous minister.
It's on the same matter to the Minister of Advanced Education to outline what programs of support he is giving as the Minister of Advanced Education for research in and teaching of active treatment geriatric medicine in the province of Alberta, which is one of the few provinces of Canada that does not.
The question is complete. Thank you.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the support that was there through the university and through the Department of Hospitals and Medical Care for specialized geriatric treatment is well known, and the very good accomplishments of Dr. Skelton are well known. It's true that we would like to see more geriatric specialists in our schools of medicine. Unfortunately, we haven't been able to convince young people that that's a good role to take up yet, but hopefully they will. because I agree with the honourable member opposite. That is the major health challenge of the future, and our educational system should be preparing for that challenge.
Final question of the day. Chair recognizes the member for Calgary-Buffalo.
To ask a supplementary in respect of the previous question, if that would be feasible, and
agreed. But
as long as it does
may
not.
we move ahead with some alacrity?
As long as it doesn't.
I recognize you as a science supplementary.
To the Minister of Hospitals, and perhaps this might be something that the Honourable Premier might wish to answer. Earlier this year, Dr. Christine Mason, who was the last geriatric medical specialist in the city of Calgary, having departed, wrote an open letter to the Premier complaining about government policies of... Has she complained about the absence of focus on geriatric medicine in the city of Calgary? There's not one geriatric doctor. What has the government response been to that letter of Dr. Mason's?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm not familiar with the particular letter the honourable member refers to. Perhaps if he could provide me with a copy of it, I'd be pleased to check into the matter.
I'm sure that the Premier could provide the honourable minister with a copy.
Did the honourable member take his place for half a moment? Thank you. The question period has technically come to an end, but because I have recognized the member for Calgary-Buffalo, we will go through this series of questions with alacrity if we have concurrence of the House. Is it agreed? Okay.
Mr. Speaker, to the Honourable Minister of Energy, we're all aware that the province of Alberta has subsidized the rest of Canada insofar as Alberta oil prices were kept below world prices for many years. Can the minister tell this House what the amount of that subsidy is according to government calculations?
The member from Westlock has indicated he'd be prepared to answer the question for you. However, the estimates that we have between 50 and 60 billions of dollars, and more accurately, 56 billion.
Mr. Speaker, to the Minister of Energy, when the government entered into the Western Accord on behalf of the people of Alberta in March of 1985, did the government not foresee at that time the potential for a major precipitous decline of oil prices?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the Western Energy Accord was in response to an unfair national energy program foisted upon Western Canada by the previous Liberal government. And so that accord came into... And so the agreement was a good agreement, and the industry responded like they hadn't done in years, with, as I mentioned earlier today, 1985 being an excellent year. However, the control over international prices, as the member is well aware, is beyond that of this particular province.
The question, please. Supplementary.
We're all aware, Mr. Speaker, and to the Minister of Energy, we're all aware of what a wonderful agreement it is. Might I ask the Honourable Minister why it was, in light of the obvious likelihood of a decline in oil prices, a provision was not inserted into the Western Accord protecting the people of this province, in the same manner as Section 9 appears to have been put in to protect the consumers?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I suppose we could rehash in a debate way the Western Accord negotiations leading up to that. And if the honourable member wanted to put a motion on the order paper, I'd be happy to participate.
Mr. Speaker, final supplementary to the Honourable Provincial Treasurer. Does the government have an estimate of the amount by which the deregulation of gas prices, or the amount of cost to the province of Alberta, the loss of royalties arising as a result of the deregulation of gas prices on November 1st.
Mr. Speaker, that would have to go in the order paper, that kind of a question, and more appropriately would go to the Minister of Energy.
Chair agrees. No, I'm sorry. No further supplementaries today. Thank you. The Chair would like to remind all members, all honourable members, that we have left outstanding today 8 members of the Assembly who would like to participate in the question period. And again, the Chair would remind both those framing the questions as well as those responding to the questions that the nature of question period really calls for the both sides of the posing and the answers as being relatively brief in the seeking of information. Nevertheless, the Chair apologizes to honourable members who were not able to participate in question period today, and I would hope to be able to take some notice of that with regard to question period tomorrow. I would also like to point out that the Chair and members have been guilty of using phrases such as "you" and "members from," and I hope that, again, as we carry on in the learning process, we will refer to each other as the member for, and that we do not engage in referring to each other as you. But again, our guilt has been mutual on this occasion. Might the Honourable Minister of Public Works, Supply and Services stand and reply briefly to a question which was raised yesterday in question period?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Minister of Recreation and Parks yesterday accepted a question on my behalf directed by the member for Edmonton Meadow Larg. The question was related to the supply of certain products for the construction of a road project on Highway 17. I'm in a position today to inform the House that the assessment of tender documents has been completed and the contract is being awarded to Gemstar, located in Edmonton, Alberta.
Orders of the day. I wonder,